This is a high-level walkthrough of the Library of Congress BibFrame Editor UX optimization. My name is Philip Jacobson, and I'm a user experience designer from Copenhagen, and also the founder of Samhain, the company that's been doing the design analysis and redesign of the editor. So a quick disclaimer before I begin is that this editor has been designed with and for the members of the Library of Congress staff. And so some of the workflows that this editor and the redesign represents isn't relevant for all institutions, but only for Library of Congress, while other workflows represented are relevant for everyone. So the context of what I'm showing in this prototype is that it's the last in a series of iterations of this prototype, so it doesn't reflect each and every detail that's been discussed or decided upon in the group. I'm going to try to give you an overview of what we've been doing and the designs we've created, but we talked about so many things that it's not going to cover each and every detail. So what you'll notice in this prototype is, of course, the design, but behind the design, there is a series of things that aren't so apparent to the naked eye. So things like how we've designed the interface to support mouse navigation, keyboard navigation, or the running of macros, touchscreen use, zooming in the browser style sheet injection for people who need that for accessibility purposes, user level preferences, and so on. And the details of this might need to change a little bit depending on how it's implemented. And for it to work at all, of course, it's very important that it's implemented correctly. But the design is there to support all of these things. So if we take a look, you'll notice that some of the screens in this new redesign look a lot like some of the old screens. And that's, of course, intentional. We believe that if something isn't broken, you shouldn't fix it. And so some of these screens are quite similar and some of them are quite different. And what we're looking at here is a screen that's showing me all of my recent records that I've edited. And the reason why the first row here in the table is blue is that as soon as you hit the screen, it's ready for you to use your keyboard to navigate the interface. And so you can use your keyboard arrows up or down to move this blue cursor up or down the table, or you can use your mouse to click on anything you would like. You can also filter your recent records up here if you want. This is not an advanced search, it's a simple filter of the however many records that are here, of the recent records that you've been editing. So people mostly use the screen for catching up on work they've done the previous day, or they need to find something they've worked on. And if they need to load a new thing, then they'll use a different screen for that. So going over this interface from the start, we have the navigation, my records. The next thing in the navigational menu is everyone's records. And what you'll notice is that when I hover my mouse over the sidebar, you see a shortcut out here on the right. And depending on the precise technology we use to implement this change in the editor, these shortcuts may or may not be the right ones, because if it's done directly and solely in a browser, this of course won't work, at least not on all operating systems, because these shortcuts are already used for other things. If the editor is wrapped in something like an Electron wrapper, like we know it from the Slack client, that gives us some more opportunities. But in any case, no matter what the shortcut is, it could show up here. And so we could simply change the shortcuts if we need to when we get to the implementation. But one important thing to notice here is that you don't see everything all the time. And so when you hover your mouse out here, we show the shortcuts, and when you don't, we don't show them, just so that there isn't too much going on all of the time on the screen. Now, if I click on the next thing here in the menu, you'll notice that it looks pretty much the same. It might change a little bit in the real system, but the general idea is I just see things everyone's edited instead of the things only I have edited. And for any of these tables, you can click on the little gear icon here to change what columns you see. And so in this case, you don't see which user has been changing things, but you'd see that if you turn that on. And it would simply add or remove columns from this table. And so my records, everyone's records pretty much do the same, but they show different data. And since it's static here, it doesn't change, but of course it would in real life. Then we have the screen that allows you to create a new record. And for some users, the My Records will be the home screen. For others, Create New will be the home screen that they use. And it's very important that this is fast to operate. And so in addition to having a shortcut for each of these menu items here, there would be a hotkey for each of these templates in here. And so the idea is that you could press the hotkey to jump to a given screen and then press the hotkey to run a certain, to create a new record with a certain template. And so without using the mouse at all, you'd already have gotten started creating something new. The next screen is very similar to the one in the current editor design. It has the ability to load data in different ways. We've simplified it a bit, and we need to double check when we get to implementation how much of the data that isn't here in this design we can infer from the URL and from the incoming data, and how much we cannot. But this is perhaps the simplest screen in the entire system. Then we have the settings, and that allows you to change general settings, typography, and colors in the system. So going back, and then of course under this we have other things which are not navigational elements like these where you move around different screens. One of them is a link to the Library of Congress search catalog where people might go to find a record that they need to open up and change. And the other is to go full screen so that you won't have to spend screen on, so you won't have to spend space on your screen for things like the browser window, heading, and so on. And so that gives you quite a lot, because in some browsers, especially if you have a bookmarks bar and so on, you have quite a lot of pixels that are being used up, and it's prime real estate at the top of the screen that's being used for something that isn't important if you're focused on cataloging. So, and then here at the bottom we see who's logged in, and you can log out. If you log out, you go to the login screen. Here you can put in your username and password and log in. And when you're logged in, you see the system as we see it here. And so some screens might or might not be shown or hidden depending on whether you're logged in or logged out. Probably you would just see everything, but anything that has to do with your settings may be disabled if you're logged out. Now, looking at the My Record screen here, if you click on one of the records in the table, what you'll see is that the screen changes. So we keep the navigation here on the left, so you can easily access any of the main menu items, but we get a preview of the record that I clicked on. So here at the top we have a dynamically generated snippet of the content that's just there to make you identify that you're looking at the right thing. So this data is actually down here, title information, creator of work, and so on. And we just pull it out to sort of give you some human readable way to distinguish that you're looking at the right record. If you prefer to see more things on your screen at once, you can switch the layout here over on the right. So you get things in more columns, and depending on the size of your screen, that may be 2 columns like we have it here or more. At the same time as that's convenient to have a lot of stuff on your screen, it's also quite convenient and easy to read sometimes if you just have one column. So it's really up to whoever's using it, how they would like to see it. I can of course proceed and edit the record, and I have some other actions: duplicate, print, delete permanently, and we'll go over those in a second. First, I just want to show the changelog. So if I click here on changelog, you'll notice that the layout changes a little bit, and it shows me for this current version of the record what's been changed since the last version of it. And so an ISSN has been changed, and if I go back one version, the system is now notifying me that I'm looking at a historical version of this work and who published it and when, and I get the chance to restore this version of the work if I should so desire. And what you'll notice is that some things were added in this version. And so the idea here is that you can use this slider to go back in time to quickly browse through the changes, or you can click on a specific version here in the changelog. And this changelog only shows the changes that have actually been published. So if any editor has done a save, meaning that it hasn't been published for everyone to see, but it's only available to their account, that does not show up here, only the published versions. If I need more space for this, or if I don't want to see the sidebar, I can click hide options up here. And that's generally true in this paradigm we've created for this interface, and that anytime there's a sidebar out here on the right, you can hide it by clicking the link up here. Alright, so the different actions we can take here. I'm going to start with the simpler ones and look at the editor in the end, because that's the most complex one. So if I want to duplicate this record, it actually opens the editor, so let's do that in the end. If I want to delete it, I get a simple dialog box that says, are you sure you want to do this? And I can proceed and delete it, or I can click cancel. If I need to print it, it is important to the users that they can set up which things they want to print, and that's, as we understand it, quite an important workflow for a lot of the people who use this. And if I want to duplicate or edit, it's going to open up this record in the editor. So let's do that. So you'll notice we go to a new screen, and it looks a bit overwhelming at first. And we've worked very hard to make it as simple as possible, but also to make it very efficient at the same time. And so there's actually a bunch of stuff that you don't see right now on the screen. And so what you do see is that the keyboard focus is already here in a field, just to show what that looks like. And so we've done, we're very sparingly using color in this interface to make sure that when we do use it, it gets a lot of attention. And it should be very easy to always see where you are in the interface as you tab through or click through the different fields. Now, out here on the left, what we see is a navigational sidebar that simply shows you the headlines of all the different sections. And what you've opened is the work of this monograph, and after a lot of discussion with the users at the Library of Congress, what we found was that people really want to be able to edit both a work and an instance at the same time. And so we worked with them for a long time to reach this layout that allows you to do that. So it allows you to either edit just the work, or to edit just an instance, or to edit both things at the same time. Yeah, so that's why we see both things out here on the left. You also see a lot of little dots next to each of the headlines, and those dots indicate that something has been changed. So this screen is a static screen, of course, and it's laid out as if I've changed all the fields in the record already. If I had changed nothing, there would be no dots, and if I'd only changed some parts of the record, there would be some dots. And so this is something that's important to the end users because it can work as a sort of checklist, making sure you went through all the records. And also if you've changed something, it can work as a little flag to make sure that you can easily see what you've changed. And of course, here in the middle, we have all the different fields, and they're organized into groups. So for example, we have a group of identifiers, and in that group, right now we have one identifier, and the identifier has a key and a value. So in this case, the identifier is the key is that it's an ISSN number, and the value is the number that we see here. If I want to add more, if I want to add different identifiers, I can click on the plus out here, and that will give me a new set of these two fields. And so every time I click the button here, I'll get 2 additional fields in this little group. And you see an example of that here, where you have classification numbers, and we have 2 sets. And so that's the general logic of the editor that we see here. Now, in addition to having these groups and the regular fields, of course, we allow things like opening up a diacritics keyboard where people can define their own custom diacritics or use predefined ones for foreign scripts if they don't have the keyboard or they can't remember where exactly the diacritics are. But we also have different kinds of fields like lookups, where you can look up defined vocabularies, control vocabularies of data. You can look up existing agents, for example. In this case, we've looked up Taunton Press, which is an organization, as indicated by the icon here, and it's a verified agent indicated by the little check mark here. We also have other kinds of control vocabularies, like things that work more like tags and other things still, where you can add multiple, or some places where you can only add one, and so on. And so we have all of these things defined in a sketch I can quickly show you at the end of this video, but suffice it for now to say that we've strived to keep it as simple as possible while maintaining all of the rich and complex functionalities that people really feel that they need, working with this interface all day long, every day for a very long time. And so what you'll also notice is that these buttons are only showing up here right now. And so the way this will actually work, is intended to work, is that when you hover your mouse over a certain section, it will show those buttons, or if you're focused on a field like here, it will also show those buttons. And so if we showed all the potential buttons at all times, that would mean we would have 2 buttons here, 2 buttons here, 2 buttons here, and so on. And you'll also notice that we allow people to drag and drop these things around. And so we would have that for each group, and we would actually also have a drag and drop handle for the group itself, and we would have drag and drop handles out on the left, and so on. So all of these things are not shown. They're intended to be shown as you hover different parts of the screen, to keep things simple and to not overwhelm the user. So far so good. We have the navigational overview, we have the editor here in the middle, and then we have a preview of what you've been doing here on the right. And this is all by request and through dialogue with the users that we've arrived at this layout. And so what you'll notice is that because my keyboard focus is here in the ISSN field, that highlights this whole section, identifiers, and it's highlighted out here on the left, and it's highlighted out here on the right. Now, if I were to click on classification numbers, for example, or classification numbers out here for that matter, the system would scroll down and highlight the first field in that section, being this one here. And it would highlight it out here and out here. And so the idea here is that here I get an overview of what the data looks like in the end. In the middle, I can control the data. And on the left, I get a fast way to jump to any section I want. And I also get an overview of what I've changed, plus the ability to add new sections if I've hidden any. So over here on the right, we have the preview. And as I showed you on the other screen, we can hide or show this preview pane. So some people really definitely want to use this. And if we're on a bigger screen, this preview pane will simply take over any remaining space on the screen. And so you would be able to see the work and the instance side by side on such a layout. Some people prefer to not have this pane, at least not all the time. And so if the user who's using this doesn't want that, they can simply hide it. Once the user feels like they're ready to publish, or if they just want to preview everything without all the clutter, they can click preview all here. And when they click on that, they come to this much simpler screen that's simply showing the preview of these different things. And here they can switch the layout to show things in one column or side by side like it is here, just like on the other screen that I showed you before. They can choose to go back to the editor, choose without publishing anything, or they may choose to publish and keep editing, or publish and close. If they publish and continue editing, they simply come back to the editor. If they publish and close, they're going to be sent back to the home page, and it will highlight the things that have been updated, and then they can proceed to the next task. So I think that covers the options that you're provided with for looking at existing records. If you're creating a new record, it works pretty much the same way, only you would get a blank record or records depending on what template you pick. So let's say I go in here and I click on one of these, I would get the same screen but with empty fields, or with filled-in fields. It depends what's defined in the template. And so templates are something that are really important to people because it's a time saver, and there is a technical feature in the current system, but we've tried to find a way to make it easier to work with. And so what we've really done is try to not make a separate interface for managing templates. We're relying on this interface that, as you can tell, we've put so much energy into all these little details, and people are going to be familiar with this interface when they catalog a lot. And so if you feel like you're done with your work on a record, and you might want to use this for the next time you do this type of monograph in this language or in this genre or whatever could fit, we provide some options through this little menu over here. So if you click on that, you get the chance to click Save as Template, and you'll notice that not much changes, but a little bit does. So I click Save as Template. It hides the preview pane, and it shows a little bar here at the bottom. And so what that allows me to do is to click Save Template if I'm feeling good about the way that the record is in its current form. I could also think that, the record is good, but I don't want any content in it next time I work on this format. And so this state here that I'm in now, in this state, I'm not actually editing that record that I was working on. I'm now editing a potential template. And so I could clear all the fields if I should so desire, and then click Save Template. Or I could make small changes that are relevant in this context. When I'm done with that, I can look up a template here in this lookup, and so I just start typing, and either I can create a new template or override an existing one. When I've done that, I just click Save Template, and then that's gonna save my template for me. All of this, of course, is I'm sure tremendously complex for the people who have to build it, but we've strived to keep it simple for the people who have to use it. And so the idea is that you simply use the editor as you normally would, and when you feel good about the results, you just click Save Template, and then that creates or updates an existing template. What that also means is that if you want to edit an existing template, We could have created a bunch of extra pages to view and edit templates, but a simple way to do it, where we make use of all the interfaces that people know and we don't create a bunch of extra things that need to be developed, is that you simply click on one of these records to create a new record, or that's what you normally do, and then you get this screen. And if at this point you click Save as Template, then you get the template in the form that it was. You can make your changes if you wish. We would want this to be filled in already. And then you can click Save when you're done, and that would override the existing template. So that's my records, everyone's records. We talked about what a record looks like when you view it, view the history, you look at the actions that you can perform with it. And we just looked at how to create a new record either from my personal templates or from the general templates. And that brings us to loading existing templates. And so this is quite similar to what is already there in the current system. We did do a little bit of testing here for what might be done on a screen like this. And one thing we did discover was that we might be able to allow you to, when you've found a URL in here that's relevant, that has the that will often have some ID in the URL that can be used to tell us what record it is, and the remaining part of the URL will tell us what type of resource it is. And so what we might be able to do is allow people to simply drag and drop the URL from here into this interface, and that would allow you to load the record. We need to double check the details, and it's only a quick test that we did, but there are some potential interesting quick things that might be done to make the workflow a little bit more seamless if we want to explore them. So, but otherwise, we have the flow that people know from the existing layout. So that's a simple screen. Then we have settings, and these are really important to people, and they are not as simple as they seem. I mean, they're very simple to use, but there's going to be a lot of work in implementing this and actually making it work. So some of it is quite technically simple for people who are familiar with the concepts. Some of it is quite complex to build. It has to be done right, otherwise it's practically impossible. But if it's done right, then it can be done in a fairly elegant way, most of it. So we have some general settings, and the first one is what do you open when you open your editor. So if you go to whichever the root domain is, root URL of this editor, what do you see if you're already logged in? And so that's the reason we want people to be able to choose that, is that some people always want to see the create new screen to begin with. Some people want to see the records that they've already created to begin with. By changing this here, that simply changes what the home page is for a given user. The next thing is a simple, I'm not sure if it's an HTML or JavaScript setting, but it basically turns off that thing that makes your browser put little red dots under things that you write in input fields on websites, because essentially this is a website with the technology that it's currently built in and that it's intended to be built with. So in any case, it's possible to let the browser tell the operating system not to put those red dots under things that are misspelled or that it thinks is misspelled, which would often be the case if you're doing original cataloging, because you might have a lot of new names or foreign words. And so that will be turned off by default. Then we have some typographic characters, typographic settings that you might be able to turn on or off, yeah, those are simple enough given the the typography that's being used. And actually, I can see that these belong in the next section, so we will move those in there. Moving on to that section, the typography section. It's quite important for people. The most crucial thing we've been hearing is that, font should be legible, the typography and the typefaces should be big enough so that they can easily be read. It should have all the characters needed, and it should support all of the scripts that are being used. And so, of course, there isn't one typeface or even one typeface family, I think, that covers 100% of all scripts in all languages. But there are some that both do well, used digitally, and are legible and clear, have all the right characters and accents and glyphs, and that also provide a very good level of support for different scripts and different languages. And so trying to keep with the general look and feel, while also trying to support as many scripts and languages as we could, we've picked out some fonts that are meant to be very legible, friendly on the eyes when used for a long time, and would also work well on an array of devices and at different sizes. And so some of the fonts, the primary default font that you see here is a font that has a Hebrew version, an Arabic version. It has a Hebrew version. It has a Cyrillic version. It has a Greek version. It has various other scripts. It does not contain the Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, and so we'll probably want to fall back on the Noto font family for those, and then in the end to fall back on the operating system typefaces. And so for those not familiar watching this video with the way that web typography works, you define an array of typefaces, and you basically tell the browser that if whatever character you're trying to show is available in the primary typeface, then use the character from that typeface. So let's say the letter A in Latin, in the Latin script, for example, uppercase A. If that's available in November Pro, the typeface used here, then use that. And then behind the scenes, we'll have an array of other typefaces that it will try to go through. So Google has done a project to provide a quite comprehensive set of fonts that would support a lot of different scripts, and so we'll want to try to fall back on those fonts. And then the operating systems oftentimes provide a lot of support for different scripts, and so it's also possible to ask the browser to fall back on the typefaces that the operating system support. The challenge with the operating system fonts is that they vary from operating system to operating system. Their sizes vary, the position vertically compared to the typefaces they might be displayed next to varies across systems, and that sort of thing. And so if possible, it's always better to be able to control what's being shown. And so by using a typeface like November Pro that we've picked here, it ensures that we can control that things are the correct size, and that they that they are aligned in the right way, and they have the right amount of space needed, and so on. Yes, but what we also heard from users is that it's very important for them to not get stuck with whatever hopefully good and reasonable choices we're making in what default fonts we provide. But for those people who might work with a small language, or a language that's not supported in these, even though they do cover more than 200 different languages and several different scripts, people want to be able to provide, first of all, fallback fonts. So if some seldomly used character is only available in very select few fonts, people want to be able to say, try whatever the system gives me, and in the end, fall back on this particular font that I'm providing you with. and this requires someone to install a font on their computer, and then they can put in the name of the font here, and then after trying all these other fonts, it will try the font people provide. Some people are also very adamant that it's and this comes from the lack of features, I think, in traditional systems and the typefaces provided there. It's very important for people to be able to choose their very own specific typeface, and so all that requires technically from the system is that you allow the user to put in the name of the typeface that you want, and then it puts that typeface at the front of the array that the browser uses of typefaces. Of course, if people use a font that's very differently, that has a very different basic sizing, it might mean that everything becomes very small or large. And we've discussed this, of course, with the users, and they're generally fine with that risk because most people, or some people, will not make use of this, but the people who do will then know that there is a risk that it could break the layout. And of course, there could be people could try to counteract whatever problems they might face by using their own typeface, by setting the font size, by zooming in the browser, using Control plus or minus to zoom in or out. Just as an extra precaution or piece of advice, we provide a little notice here to people that there are some tools out there that they could use if they have a specific typeface they need to use because of their preference or because of the script or the characters that are in it, that might solve whatever problem it could have that the typeface is differently spaced or sized. So there was a lot of talk about typefaces, but this is something that's very crucial for people doing all this original cataloging in very many different scripts, and it's something that's very close to people's hearts, that they don't lose control of what their interface looks like, which of course is very understandable, with people having to work in this interface so many hours every day over long periods of time. You'll want it to be customizable to the extent that it supports your workflows and makes it a comfortable experience for you using this interface. So we provide a lot of customization here. Most of it is focused on functionality, if not all of it. To some extent, some of these things are also about preference, but of course, if someone has to use it many hours a day, feeling comfortable is also something that's going to make the interface more useful for you. So then we have the font weight, allowing people to choose bolder fonts if they want that, and then diacritics, which is of course something that people need when they're cataloging in foreign scripts. And what this allows you to do is to choose. There's a little drop down that you can open in any of the text fields in the system that we're intending. So whenever you see this little keyboard, you click on that, and that opens a little drop down with some predefined diacritics from Hebrew, Arabic, and other scripts, and it also allows you to define your own diacritics. So if you often catalog in a certain script, or you often have need to spend time finding a certain diacritic, you can define these diacritics custom here. And this is something I believe people are already familiar with from their existing systems. It also allows you to choose a hotkey so that when you open that drop down, you can just press a key and it will pick whatever diacritic you've defined for that. So far, so good. We have one screen left, and it deals with something that might seem unimportant on the face of it. What you'll notice in this whole interface is that everything almost is monochrome, and that's not primarily because, well, it's not because we wanted it to be black and white. We actually had explored a path at first where we used some more soothing colors for the interface. But what we found out was that it was very important for people, of course, to know what they're editing. And is it a work I'm editing, or is it an instance? And so to make it very clear to people what they're editing at any given moment in time, we chose to rely on the text, so you can always read what you're doing, the icons here with their color, and the background color, so that if you normally edit instances and you end up editing something like this, even if you don't consciously notice it, there should be something that just feels different, and you might think about what's going on, because of course the impression you get from the screen here with the purple background is very different from the one you get here with the copper green background. And so the important thing here is not the colors, but the fact that they differ. And in addition to the colors, we use the iconography and the text. And so all of this to say that, and that is the primary layout design approach for this interface paradigm, is that the colors are there to make it distinguish easily between entities. Now, if you don't want to have this distinction, you can choose a different color scheme. If you don't want those icons, you can go and turn off the icons in the settings. And if you want a dark mode that feels easier to your eyes, you can swap the colors around. All of this should be fairly straightforward technically to implement. It will take a little care to make sure the CSS is set up in the right way for the system. But all of this color stuff should be fairly straightforward to do, given that it's structured in the right way from the beginning. And so you can choose a light or dark theme, which would make this white background dark instead of light. And then you can stick with the initial design approach, which is that we use these colors in the interface primarily to distinguish entities, and then we'll provide a general styling for that, and then some different themes based on trying to support people with different kinds of color blindness. And then we have had a request from the group that that for some people it's important to be able to change the interface color, and that's since we're already wanting to do that for the purpose of distinguishing between these types of entities and making it friendly on the eyes when you work with this for long hours. It's not really a big deal providing more color options for the interface. And so what would make it more complicated, if as far as I understand, is if we let people, if we intend to let people choose exactly the color that they want, because that brings us to a place where we need to technically have the website inject code into the running site, and it just makes it complicated. And so this here would basically toggle a class off. So this gets a little technical, but in terms of what happens with the CSS, this would basically toggle a class on or off at some top level of the website, allowing you in CSS to predefine all of these themes, which would be fairly straightforward using some basic pre-processing in CSS. But again, it really requires that when this is set up from the beginning, it's really done right and with care, and by people who really know what they're doing. Otherwise, it's going to be practically impossible to go through the whole site and fix it afterwards, or at least very cumbersome. And so, as it is with many things in CSS, which is CSS is the code used to style everything on this type of technology. All right, so Yes, so that was a lot of talk about these settings, but they are very important, and they're not primarily here to deal with just things that people think are nice. I mean, we've added these extra bunch of colors because some people have requested it, and we hope and have attempted to make it so that people don't need to define their own fonts, but as a fallback, and also for some people who would prefer it, it would be good to be able to. It was very important to people in the group to be able to define these extra fonts. But everything else here is very much focused on functionality. And then there are some easy wins like allowing you to toggle on or off CSS properties for these different typefaces. All right, so I could talk more about the general styling of the interface, but I think I've pretty much covered the philosophy, which is that it's extremely functionality focused, and 90% of the styling that we're doing is really focused on making it easy to read the screen, making it clear where you're supposed to focus, making it just accommodating all of these functions at the same time without getting completely overwhelming, and trying to provide an efficient workflow for people. And then the last 10% are stylistically arbitrary. This color could be blue instead of green, and this could be red instead of, or it could be yellow instead of purple. Yeah, there isn't much room in the way that we approach this for styling, and so it should be. Now, so that was all that is in this prototype that I'm sharing. We have a bunch of other things that we've, of course, shared through the work with the group. We have the other prototypes, and we've tried to outline a lot of the different types of fields, so this won't be so relevant to end users, but it will be very relevant to the people who have to develop it. And so we've tried to do some mock-ups of what the different types of fields would look like. So here we have a simple drop-down field where you click on it, and then you can choose a type. So in this case, a type of agent, which won't actually be relevant, but the interaction is still relevant, even if the data example is not. And then we have something like a lookup for agents, which will actually function as a kind of modal that pops up. So as soon as you start to type, it opens up a modal where you can where you're typing in a name, and then it shows you a list of agents that match the thing that you're typing. And using either your keyboard or your mouse, you can move up or down this list. And when you feel like you found what you need, you can click enter on your keyboard or click here with your mouse to add this agent. You can scroll up or down in this field to see the entire agent entity. And if you need to create something new, you can click down here to add once, declare that you're creating something new, and also declaring the type of thing that you're creating. And when you do, it will be added like this, and if it's authorized, then it will look a little bit different than if it's not. And if it's not, then it will, when you click on it, make it easy for you to get to a place where you can fill in the necessary information to have it be authorized. Then we have other fields that work more like tag fields, as we know it from other systems, where you start typing and then you basically search in this existing control vocabulary, and that allows you to add different control vocabulary items to the same field. We have free text fields that can either be fixed in size or that expand. In general, we will probably just want all of these to expand. Again, that's an implementation specific. And then we have other types of fields where we might have these drop downs, but with different sections that you can look up. And so, yeah, a lot of different stuff. And this is probably mostly relevant for developers. And what usually happens, of course, when we get to the development, there are a few things that still need to be answered, or that the things that we have designed need to be reconsidered because of the technology or something else. But we did put a lot of thought into how to do these different things. So these are available for anyone who needs them. Oh, we have even more stuff. So this is actually quite important. In the editor, we have the ability to use these repeatable fields and repeatable field groups. So we already saw the notion of a repeatable field group, where you can click on these buttons to the right of the group to repeat the group or remove the group. Some fields are actually repeatable themselves, for those you'd be able to click a plus or minus within the field itself. Now, clicking the minus on the last occurrence of a field is sometimes allowed if it's not mandatory, which would essentially make all the note fields disappear from the interface. And when you do that, we need some way to be able to bring back the fields. And so this is actually something people would actually want to use proactively, intentionally, to hide the fields that they never use for certain types of resources. And so all that would happen is you would see this little link up here that says show 3 hidden fields. And actually, to make this easy for people, if you have 3 empty fields that are non-mandatory, that little link instead says hide 3 blank fields. So when you fill in what you need, you can click on this, and then that's gonna turn into this down here below. Yes, I think this is just going over the same stuff. So yes, we have the prototype. We have a bunch of these sketches. We of course have a lot of things that have been walked through with the group. So I would say we, as designers, are a good resource to pull on, and the group itself is a good resource to pull on, simply because they've had all these discussions and thought about everything. But I think the prototype that we were looking at should outline the high level and a lot of the details about how exactly should this thing look when you click on it. It's available as these separate sketches that are more static in nature. All right. I think that concludes the overall walkthrough. If anyone has any questions, I'm more than happy to assist with trying to shed some light on whatever you need to know. Thank you.